When I come here, I feel honestly very comfortable. And I want to thank Ahavat Shalom for allowing us to use their beautiful synagogue. A few years ago, I was bar mitzvahed in a synagogue not very different from this. And I am delighted to be here with members of the immigrant community because my father was an immigrant. And we will not allow people to attack immigrants because immigrants built this country. And in a moment, we're going to be talking about things like rent control, which is pretty not a radical idea to me because I grew up in a rent control department, Brooklyn, New York. So what we're going to do is I'm going to speak for 3 or 4 hours. Few minutes, and then we got a great panel here of folks who know more about housing than I do. And I'm going to introduce them to you in a moment. And then after that, we're going to open it up for your comments and your questions. I think the important thing that we're doing today is understanding that in terms of affordable housing, we have a major, major crisis, not just in California, but in fact, all over this country. And we are not going to solve that crisis unless we talk about that crisis and unless we come up with some very specific ideas as to how, in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, we end the absurdity of 500,000 Americans being homeless and so many people spending 40, 50, 60% of their limited incomes in housing. That's what today is about. And the truth is that when we have some 18 million families in our country spending more than 50% of their limited incomes on housing, just think about it. How do people buy the food? How do they take care of their kids? How do they put gas in their car? How do they afford health care? And the answer is they do not. It is unacceptable to me that there is virtually no place in America, especially in states like California, where a full-time minimum wage worker can afford a decent one-bedroom apartment. That is not acceptable. So this issue of affordable housing also, of course, ties in to wages. I remember a couple of months ago, I was talking to a guy who works at an airport, and he lives here in California. And I said, how much money do you make? He said, I'm not doing bad. We're making $17 an hour. But he says, it doesn't mean anything because I am spending all of that to house my wife and kids. All right, so when we look at affordable housing, it ties into income, and nobody in America is going to be able to purchase or rent affordable housing when you're making $10, $12 an hour. So when we talk about affordable housing, we are also talking about raising the minimum wage to a living wage. And then you talk about not only wages, and you talk about housing, you talk about basic issues of morality. Today in America, we have well over 500,000 people who are either sleeping out on the streets or are in emergency shelters, including 58,000 right here in Los Angeles County. And we have got to ask ourselves, what in God's name is going on in this country when we could give over $1 trillion in tax breaks to the top 1% and large profitable corporations, but presumably we do not have enough money to make sure that 500,000 of fellow Americans are not homeless. That is an outrage. And furthermore, when you get into the guts of what's going on in housing, we have got to appreciate that it is not acceptable that wealthy developers in Los Angeles County and throughout the country are gentrifying neighborhoods and that is ugly on two counts. Number one, people throughout America grew up in communities. This is where they grew up. This is the neighborhood that they love. And now they are being forced out of those neighborhoods and being replaced by folks who can afford expensive condominiums. That is not acceptable either. So today we have got to talk about gentrification and what that means to working class neighborhoods all over America. And unfortunately, and it will not surprise anybody in this room, we now have a president who is not just ignoring the affordable housing crisis, he and his administration are actively making it worse. If you can believe it, in the midst of this terrible housing crisis, instead of expanding federal housing programs, Trump is proposing to cut them by $9.6 billion or 18%. I mean, this is how out of touch this White House is with the needs of working class families. Instead of expanding affordable housing, Trump is proposing to eliminate the National Housing Trust Fund, which is now the major program to build low-income rental units. And I take a little bit of umbrage with that because actually that was the legislation that I introduced, along with Barbara Lee here in California. I think the principle that we are talking about here and what the political revolution that some of us are engaging in right now is to understand that there are certain fundamental rights that every American must be entitled to. And in my view, that certainly includes the right to health care for every American. Health care is a human right, not a privilege. It means the right for all of our people, regardless of their income, to get a higher education. Which is why we will make public colleges and universities tuition-free and cancel all student debt in America. And it also means the right to affordable housing in America. Now, in a few weeks, we are going to be introducing and releasing a very detailed plan. But let me tell you some of what, will be in that plan. First, we must significantly and permanently expand the National Affordable Housing Trust Fund to build the 7.5 million units of housing that lower-income people, senior citizens, and people with disabilities need. And not only will this close the affordable housing gap, it will create millions of good-paying union jobs. Second, we must fully fund the Section 8 rental assistance program. In Vermont, and I know all over this country, there are huge waiting lists to get Section 8 housing. We're going to end those waiting lists. Third, we must end homelessness in the United States by doubling funding for the McKinney-Vento homeless program. And we're going to improve significantly critical services to those who are experiencing chronic homelessness, because the issue sometimes, as you know, takes us into another crisis, which is the mental health crisis facing this country. Fourth, another major issue out there is that we must invest significantly into maintaining and expanding our dilapidated public housing stock. I don't know what the situation here is in California, but I do know that in New York and elsewhere, you got public housing that is just falling apart. It has not gotten the kind of resources it needs to rehabilitate those homes. There are elevators and high-rise apartments that are not working. There are rats and cockroaches all over the place. So we have got to rehabilitate public housing in America. Fifthly, and this is another, there's so many issues we can go on here for hours, and these guys will know more about it than I do, and they'll be talking about it. But here is another issue, and that is we have got to figure out a way to make sure that housing is perpetually affordable. Or in other words, we can build a housing unit today and it's good for the family, but then 20 years that price has gone up and it's not good for future families. When I was mayor of the city of Burlington, we were the first city in America to put funding into community land trust housing. And that has been enormously successful. And what that says, it does something a little bit complicated, but what it does is pretty simple. It says the land trust, the community land trust, owns the land. You own the house. So you can do whatever you want with the house. But when you sell that house, you can't sell it at market rates and make a lot of money. You're going to have to sell it. You can make a modest profit on it. But the next person who comes along will be able to enjoy that affordable housing as well. So that's a model which has spread, by the way, not only all over America, but all over the world. Now, as somebody who, as I said earlier, grew up in a 3.5-room rent-controlled apartment, which was so important for my family. My dad never made much money, but at least we did not have to spend a fortune on housing. So we have got to also make sure that communities can realize every tool that is available to them to make housing affordable, including rent control. Landlords should not be able to simply raise rents to any level they want, anytime they want. Further, we must also make certain that communities are able, have the legal right to require that real estate developers include affordable housing in new developments. So it is simply not acceptable. And we did this in Burlington when I was mayor as well. You just can't come in and build expensive housing. And to build expensive housing, you're going to also have to build a significant amount of affordable housing. Further, we must aggressively defend and promote the legal protections of fair housing and make sure that no one in this country is denied housing based on the color of their skin, their national origin, their religion, their gender, or their disability. We must end the modern-day redlining that subjects people of color to unfair loan processes and arbitrary denials. And finally, obviously, to make sure that, as I mentioned earlier, that housing is affordable, people have got to earn a living wage.